Hello, it is time. Welcome to this already fifth edition of Miltton Futures. You can of course find all the previous Miltton Futures discussions from our YouTube channel. For example, the last one on cryptocurrencies has been very popular there. But today we have a totally different topic. We will be reimagining cities. Our topic today is redefining resiliency after the pandemic. We're coming to you live from Helsinki and from Stockholm today, and as a keynote today we have in the beginning a discussion between the mayors of these both cities. I'm Ville Blåfield. I'm here at Miltton House in Hakaniemi, Helsinki in our contactless studio, and I will be joined by Billy McCormac from our Stockholm office. Billy, do you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you, Ville. Do you hear me?
Yes, and now I can see you as well. Yeah. Happy Eurovision good. Week.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, we have a really exciting panel discussion after you finished speaking to the mayors of Helsinki and Stockholm. We've got four really good experts when it comes to urban development and everything that has to do with cities. For example, we have Charlie Gullström, who's a research and innovation strategist at Sweco Architects. Juha Kostiainen, who's executive vice president of the urban development at YIT Corporation, which is a construction company. Milla Lötjönen, director of mobility and digital services at Sitowise. And Steinar Danielsen, who's sustainability lead at Volvo car mobility here in Stockholm. So it's going to be a great conversation, but really looking forward to hearing the mayors give their take on cities, especially given the pandemic in the last year.
Yeah, agree. And I loved your reaction to the festivities of the Eurovision week. Nice to be on the same page with you on that. Billy's panel in about 20 minutes right after the discussion between the mayors. You can take part in these discussions by submitting your questions or your comments. There is a Q&A button on the right-hand side of your screen. So through that you can send comments and questions, and then I will see them here, and I will then ask our panelists or give your comments to the discussions. And if you're commenting on the discussions on social media, of course, we hope that you use hashtag MilttonFutures. But now, it is our great pleasure to welcome the mayors. So we have online mayors from both cities. Anna König Jerlmyr from Stockholm, as we can see from the background, and Vapaavuori from Helsinki. What a beautiful Helsinki background you have there, Jan. I myself, I'm happy to report that I got my first COVID vaccine this morning by the city of Helsinki. The cities are opening. It seems that there is light at the end of the tunnel. My first question to you both is maybe first to Stockholm. Where do you see yourself or your city on the timeline? How far do you think that we are from, say, some form of normality?
Yes, so we're still waiting for everyone to get the vaccine. And now it's people born from 71 and older that get the first dose. But of course, we are looking forward to a set date where we can open up. So they said, the government, that the 1st of June will be an important date when the restriction will be less. But as concern for digital work, they tell us that we should wait until the middle of September before we can go back to normal, if there will be a new, go back to normal, or if it will be a new normal. But of course, I hope that the vaccine intensity will increase so that we can open up Stockholm for the summer.
How about Mr. Vapaavuori? How do you see the situation in Helsinki?
Good afternoon, and especially Anna, it's so nice to have a chat with you once again. Let me start by saying that I don't think that normal is maybe that interesting. As you may know, we in Finland and Helsinki, we are quite weird, but weird in a good way, and actually we are proud of that. But seriously speaking, I think that we in Helsinki, we have been able to walk through this path with relatively small losses, and life has been relatively normal, if you may use that word, in Helsinki during the whole pandemic, at least compared to many other cities. And I'm actually quite proud of how well our strategy of being the most functional city in the world has even worked during this global pandemic. But then to the question, when we then definitely will be released of all the restrictions which we have in today's world, still I think it's very, very much dependent on how the vaccination is continuing. And then here we are very much in the same boat with all other cities actually in the European Union. So I'm also optimistic. I think like my dear colleague Anna, that I'm optimistic that we can open up Helsinki, maybe not completely, but close to that during the summertime. And then maybe what is more like an open question is what happens after the summer, whether we will have a fourth or fifth or sixth wave or something like that after the summer, what we got last year.
Anna, how would you answer to a question of how has the pandemic changed how you see your city, or say the near future of Stockholm?
I think that is one question that we discuss now as political leaders, and I know that Jan and me are very involved in that, is how will the city change after the pandemic? And if you look at the newspapers, many will tell you that this is the end of the urbanization. And, they in Stockholm, you can see, and I think it's the same in the Nordic capitals, that people are now moving from the city core and the city to more suburbs or to other districts within the country, and they say, okay, now is the end of the cities. But I am certain that we will also see a future and a renaissance in the city with the right measures, of course, and with a clear policy that also will attract talent and make the cities more livable for the future. Because this is not the first time we have had a pandemic. You could also see this after the Spanish flu, that people were moving out from the cities, but today you can see it's really, the mega cities and the big cities around the world that is leading the transformation for more for development, innovation, sustainability. So but it's really important for us also to be aware that this could lead, for the city to be like a donut, empty, the core. No one wants to be there, but it's a lot of attractions and livability in the suburbs. So we had a discussion this morning that we said, okay, let's not end up as a donut. Let's end up as a passion fruit, with a lot of different city centers. And I know that many visionary leaders today talk about, the 15-minute city. There is really close to service, to restaurants, to good schools. But it's also really important for us to have an attractive, city district, a downtown district, where people could actually meet. Because it's one thing that we are missing now is to have mutual experience with culture, with restaurants, with music, entertainment. And I think that, after the Spanish flu, we saw the the Roaring Twenties, and I'm certain that we will see that again. But then we can't take culture, we can't take all this for granted, and then we need to work, to really support entrepreneurs and their creative people to bring back visitors, both from our city, from other parts of the country, but also international, back to the core of the city. So we discussed this a lot, but also, how can we use the digitalization we just have seen when it comes to education, but also to work from home. Congestions in the traffic, we could avoid it if people are working different hours. So some of the staff will work from home and before lunch, and then turning to work after lunch. There will be no really intense time in traffic, so we can use what we have in a much more smarter way. And also we can use the logistic at night to bring the electric heavy vehicles in our city in a new way that also will make the city more livable, I think, with cleaner air, less noise and so on. So I think it's a lot that we need to keep and also to embrace, especially when it comes to digitalization.
Yeah, right. And to talk about learnings of the past year, we are having a seminar like this live at the same time from Stockholm and Helsinki. Maybe before 2020 we would have had to fly one of the mayors to one city to have a seminar like this. Jan, do you share this passion fruit vision for Helsinki or Nordic capitals?
Absolutely. And I mean, more or less, I once again agree with everything what Anna said. But let me have another angle. I mean, you could measure the situation of a city like Helsinki or Stockholm in either relative terms or absolute terms. And if I start with the relative one, for 4 years ago, when I launched the city strategy of the city of Helsinki, I named it the most functional city in the world. And I remember from the very beginning that, and I told my international audience that I know it's not a media sexy topic. It's not media sexy to name the city as the most functional city in the world and take that as a mission. Now, during the last year, I have had many international contacts where people have come back to me and said that you mayor of Helsinki, Jan, when you told us 3 years ago that it's not a media sexy mission and strategy, today I have to say that it is. And I think that those strengths which we have in not only in Helsinki and Stockholm, but in Nordic capitals, Northern European cities, that we are functional, we are reliable, we are predictable, we are safe, we are clean, we are big enough to be called as cities and even metropolis, but not too big in order to be that dense than really big metropolis around the world are actually attributes which will gain in importance in the future. When the world is opening up, I'm sure that attributes like safe, clean, functional, predictable, reliable are those which will be valued highly among all kind of groups in the world, investments, talents, tourists, and so on. And that's why I actually see a quite bright future for cities like Helsinki, Stockholm, Oslo, Copenhagen, and I'm really optimistic concerning the future. But then in absolute terms, of course, we have suffered a lot. And this is also a sign of how interconnected the world is. I mean, even in Helsinki, where we have been able to walk through the pandemic with relatively small losses as far as health issues are concerned, as far as casualties and dead people, I mean, there are few, if any, cities of the same size with that small numbers. But still, from a social and economic point of view, we have suffered a lot. And we face the same problem, same challenge that actually more or less all cities all around the world, that we are extremely worried about the future of the city, and especially about the downtown of the future. But even there, I think that the history has shown that people move into cities. They move into cities in order to get a job and earn their living. They move there in order to live a good life. And all the dynamics which has led to the urbanization before COVID crisis is still there. But yes, we need to fight for that. We need to be innovative. We need to have a closer look, especially on the livability of the city center and downtown area. But I think that even there we have a good chance. Let me finish by, I think it's actually a quote by a Swedish professor, Kjell Nordström, who has said something like that, I mean, everything which can be digitalized will be digitalized, but everything which can be digitalized can also be copied. And what can't be copied is human interaction. And I mean, creativeness and creative cities is actually based on human interaction. And that's why I'm sure that we will see a livable, nice, lovely Stockholm and a livable, nice Helsinki even in the future. It will take some time, but it will come.
Yeah, people move to the city to be with other people, obviously, and it's good to hear that the mayors, you believe that culture will return and the roaring fun will return. But if we think about the kind of serious learnings of the past year for the cities, and think about building the resilience of the cities going forward, Anna, what would you say? What are the key learnings in Stockholm from this shock? And how should we be more prepared to the next possible one?
One thing we have seen is that we need to work much more with international supply chains when it comes to safety materials, for example, and also have a national production of safety equipment. But I just think that you should have, you should be aware of that the next threat will not look exactly the same as the pandemic right now. So you should always be prepared, but be prepared for the unexpected. And that's why it's so important for us in Stockholm to work with Jan in Helsinki, but also work together with other cities around the world. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's pandemics or, terrorist threats. We all have to learn from each other, and also to really, this pandemic shown that we have friends in the Nordics. We have meetings, we have discussed mutual challenges, how can we engage us and those communities with information in form of vaccine, but also restrictions and recommendations. And then we discussed, I remember a phone call with Jan where we discussed that actual subject, but and how can we now open up our society and help the business community and bring back tourists? That's another subject. So I think that one of the lessons is that we can't sit in silence anymore and on different isolated islands. We need to work together in international networks. As Jan said, I think we have a strong case in the Nordics to work together to attract more talents and to attract more investments if we work together, especially after Brexit, where I think that we really, really need a closer collaborations. And I just find a great support in Jan and my other colleagues. Yeah.
How about Jan then? What are your learnings from the pandemic year? Or year and a half already?
First of all, we learned that a small incident in a marketplace in a distant Chinese city may cause a big trouble for the rest of the world. I very much agree with what Anna said, that we will face other crises in the future as well, but they will be different. And we can't prepare ourselves for everything. So as you said, we have to prepare for the unexpected. And to prepare for the unexpected is a quite difficult task. But there I come once again back to the basic philosophy of my mayorship in Helsinki, that building a functional, reliable, predictable city is maybe the best guarantee in a world where you can see unexpected events happen whatsoever. And what we also say in the city strategy is that a good city is a city with as few weaknesses and as many strengths as possible. So I mean, I think this has also underlined the brilliance of the Nordic way of thinking, that instead of single programs or single projects, you really need to have a holistic view and comprehensive approach on the city development, and understand that everything affects everything, and the less weaknesses you have, the better chances you have to survive. Or even succeed through difficult kind of times.
Would it be possible? Could you both maybe elaborate a little what you mean by this collaboration between the cities, or what it could mean in practice? Because then, say before the pandemic, I feel that the discussion that I was seeing mostly was how the Nordic capitals were competing against each other, competing on on talent on the global level, and competing on tourism, and building brands kind of against each other. So what does it mean to kind of compete to be the the most shining Nordic capital, but then at the same time develop this network of cities and cooperation? Anna?
No, but I think that exactly that. Before the pandemic, we had this, culture that we in Stockholm and the region competed mostly with Copenhagen and the greater Copenhagen. It was like, so this Swedish is involved now in the greater Copenhagen and work for them. This is not good. And who will take this municipality in the middle of Sweden? Is it Stockholm or Copenhagen? But I think that we have to stop thinking like that, because like in Stockholm business region, we have 55 different Swedish municipalities with investment, because we say it's good for the region. And we have to think broader about the region. So let's attract investment to the Nordics. And it doesn't matter. Sometimes it ends up in lovely Helsinki, and sometimes in Oslo, or sometimes in Reykjavik or in Copenhagen. It doesn't really matter, because I think that we have a strong bid or a strong case, as I said, because after Brexit, we lost a really important, I think, political ally in the European Union. And then we have so much in common with the Nordics, especially when it comes to the focus on innovation, digitalization, and sustainability. And when the world now are looking for sustainable finance and investment, we have the strongest case. So we should really work, with talent attractions. I know that we have an international house that I visit in Helsinki, and Copenhagen has it, but we should start one in Stockholm as well. And then say, okay, but can we work together, several countries, for this kind of investment, and also branding? Because one of the main challenges ahead will be to attract talent, like specialists with when it comes to IT or the software solutions. We have to attract the engineers to the Nordics to compete for the future, and I think we can collaborate much more.
Jan, do you have as big heart as Anna?
Absolutely. I mean, of course we are competing, and especially in ice hockey. And I'm
don't forget Eurovision. It's Eurovision week.
Eurovision. Yeah.
Yes, and I'm sure that we're going to beat you once again in the World Championships, which are starting this week. But honestly speaking, I mean, first of all, you have to understand that urban solutions are by nature, they are global and scalable. And they are especially well scalable in cities which are close enough to each other. I mean, we have similar kind of structures, administrative structures, cultures, and so on. Legislative system is more or less the same. So, I mean, some innovation whatsoever in maybe whatever field of world soever innovated in Stockholm could be scaled in Helsinki and the other way around. And that's why we have really much to learn from each other. And we have shared quite a lot of experiences in the fight against the pandemic with Anna, and I'm sure that we have both gained from those discussions. Then, yes, you may say that we are competing concerning one single investment or something, one single congress or something like that. Yes, maybe that's true. But the much, much bigger issue and much, much bigger picture is that if and when we are able to improve the overall brand of the Nordic region, we win that much that we all will gain much, much more from that than by competing with each other. And I think this time, this era which we are living now, could be used as an era for the Nordics, for the Nordic countries, maybe Northern Europe. I think there are so many signs which are actually on our side just today.
We have a great comment from the audience. And just a reminder, if you have a question or comment in the audience, there's a Q&A button on your screen that you can push and get through. This question is for the both of you. COVID has relieved inequalities also in the Nordic cities. Neighborhoods with larger immigrant population than average percentage in the city have suffered perhaps the most. How have our cities changed? What should the municipalities do differently to make our cities more inclusive? Anna first.
So one thing is that we have to reach out to all of the citizens with different nationalities in different languages. And I think one obstacle we could see that lots of the information we had, especially when it comes to vaccine and healthcare information in the beginning, were just in Swedish. And of course, that's really difficult in the most segregated areas to understand. So that's one thing we learned that we can do better for next time. But another thing is, like, if you look for the Somali group, for example, they have another culture. They are taking care of the elderly. And when an elderly are sick, they are there, the whole family. And I think that is a positive thing, but it's difficult in a pandemic. I mean, in Sweden, we sometimes just forget about our older relatives and we put them in elderly care and they are just waiting for a telephone call. It's just awful. So I think it's a positive thing that the whole family take care of an older relative, but it is a huge challenge when it comes to, restriction in a pandemic. So one thing we did was to create apartments. Evacuation apartments, just to find a solution for where it's very dense, where a lot of people were living together, just for the elderly to live during the pandemic. Just one solution, but of course you could see that I talked about the Spanish flu before as well. Then it was the most socioeconomic. The poor and the segregated areas that was most affected. And so today, we know that's why it's really important to work with young people, to work with health. So just to improve the health for a future pandemic or a future situation like this.
Okay, Jan, briefly, how about the equality or inequality in Helsinki?
Helsinki has been a textbook example of a city which has been able to avoid serious segregation. But of course, it is true that the pandemic deepened the polarization, and even a city like Helsinki was not immune for that. And it is true that it has caused a not that good development as far as equality is concerned. But I think that we just need to continue on the path we had before the crisis. It's about housing policy, it's about education above all, it's about positive discrimination, it is about putting emphasis on integration of the immigrants. It is a consistent, comprehensive policy which we actually did quite well before the pandemic, and now we have been reminded how important that work is.
A final comment from the audience. The concept of Nordic capitals collaboration and branding has been in discussion for some time already. Hopefully now there will be some actual measures taken towards making this idea a reality, and when listening to the mayor sounds like that there would be. Thank you so much for this keynote discussion for this hour to the both mayors. And now it is time for our panel discussion. Remember the Q&A button on your screen. Take it away, Billy.
So, hello everyone. How are you doing? Nice to see you all.
Hello.
Charlie, Juha, Milla, Steinar, nice to see you all here. So I thought it was a really interesting conversation with the mayors. And I think that one of the things that sort of struck me the most was just the fact that maybe a return to normalcy, not that interesting, not that sexy, according primarily to the mayor of Helsinki. I'd like to get sort of just a quick reactions from all of you about what you just heard. And we'll start with you, Charlie.
All right, thank you. Well, I think what they both said really is that getting out of the pandemic needs to go hand in hand with climate transition. Even if they weren't so clear on that, I think they are very aware that the preparations that they have done top down now need to be met also by other measures to involve the citizens, to get people out there and to create more inclusive cities. And I know that both cities they've done really good preparations in terms of digital infrastructure. And now it's time to also maybe work on participatory models for democracy and new ways of getting people involved in processes for capacity building, but also for climate transition.
Great, thank you. Juha.
Yes, thank you. I would say that this idea about international cooperation between capitals was important, and typically we tend to think that those are competitors, as they said there. But then in many cases, you have much more peer approach with other mayors or other cities if comparing that you discuss with your own government in national level. And I think that's something we should be happy about and promote that, and maybe find the even more how should I say, certain frameworks how to do that, and considering, for example, promoting innovation, it could be also economic development policy from city point of view, that you share your innovations and maybe your companies could be there also in other places. So that was important approach.
Interesting. Milla, what did you think about the conversation?
Yes, well, I have to agree with you, Charlie, that maybe Jan's vision about most functional city and kind of taking the sustainable framework and doing the best job that we can, that's the best way of just preparing ourselves to whatever may come. But I have to also say that I love the passion fruit vision.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Great name for that.
We've all heard the donut for a while, so it was interesting to hear the passion fruit. Steinar.
I couldn't agree more.
Steinar, what did you think?
Yeah, I think that's what I was going to raise, is the passion fruit. I think as an idea, as a mental picture to what we want to try to create, and I think it's important that we then start working together with this collaboration in order to be able to create the city that we want to create in a more sustainable way, that people can be more, our cities can be more of an attractive area for not just business, but also for people and culture in the center. So you don't end up with this donut. So for me, I think it was great to have this idea of a passion fruit thing, because that really creates a vision of which we want to try to achieve in a very simple and clear way.
Milla, I'd like to go back to you, and I'm going to ask each of you. I'd like to get sort of also a quick reaction about sort of the biggest takeaway you've had from this year, the sort of lamentable year of the global pandemic. What is the one thing that you've taken with you and now are thinking about going forward in your line of work?
Well, that's maybe the passion fruit was so lovable that one of my personal takeaways is the increased importance of everyone's own neighborhoods, and due to that, the change in dynamics all in all. And while the identity of suburban areas has increased, I think it's more like the demand of city-like services has increased, like the mobility, restaurants. Who wouldn't have to have all those services just like in 15-minute region from your home?
Yeah. And we're going to get back more about the 15-minute city. Juha, your biggest takeaway from this past year?
I would say that the biggest takeaway was that how great places city really are. I mean, when you realize that everything is closed and how sad that was, so you really realize the importance and attractiveness of cities. And I think we have even more clear vision. How do we want to develop those, and how should we nurture the cities? I think that was a great lesson to learn.
Finally, Charlie.
Well, I could agree with what was said, but just to add that maybe there's been so much talk of the city, but actually it's the urban qualities of the small town, really the small scale urbanity that's really come into focus, I think, in a good way. And we have a lot of work to do because these small towns, they exist all over our country. So we must not only speak of our capital cities, which are really towns, or maybe the Nordic capitals are one city, a mega city.
So thinking more in terms of communities. All right, we're going to get a little bit more into the weeds. Milla, I'm going to start with you. And you've spoken about the importance of adopting what you call like an end user or a citizen perspective when addressing some of these issues that relate to development and resiliency. Can you explain a little bit your thinking on this?
Yes, thanks, Billy. Well, as we all know, cities, both in physical and digital sense, they're increasingly complex ecosystems with multiple processes evolving and changing simultaneously. So, in my opinion, what these processes should all have in common is the end user perspective, asking the questions: who or for what is this designed for? Whose everyday life will get better? I think that helps us to set the focus in the right place at the right time. And it may bring some clarity into this somewhat chaotic world of urban development.
Yeah. And Steinar, this is sort of dovetails into your thoughts on shared mobility. Of course, Volvo Car Mobility has its M service in Sweden. You've been looking at this, and from a service design also perspective. As from your perch as sustainability lead at Volvo Car Mobility, what do you see on the horizons? How are you thinking around these kinds of issues?
So, I mean, one thing that's happened really radically over the last year due to the pandemic and then the requirement for social distancing is that the cities themselves have been taking a lot of space from pretty much a dead area, which is the car infrastructure. And a large percentage of the car infrastructure is being now repurposed into bike lanes or pedestrianized areas. And so for us, it's important that we can continue to develop that, because what we see is that we need to focus on creating a viable alternative to car ownership so that we are able to create a more healthy and viable, a healthy and livable future. And we focus very much on doing that by listening to our customers, understanding what people need. From that, I've got a saying that says that convenience eats sustainability for breakfast, and that what I mean by that is that at scale, customers are always going to choose the most convenient solution for their needs, and that might not always be the most sustainable solution, but in the pressures of everyday life means that convenience does eat sustainability for breakfast. So it's up to us to be able to provide a viable alternative that is better than car ownership inside the city, which can continue to allow cities to free up that space and bring that space not just into away from dead cars, parked cars, into areas of culture and spaces for people, basically. We can see that every car that we put out on the street replaces the need for 8 privately owned cars. And so that is a huge amount of space that we're creating inside the cities. But it not only does that, but it changes behavioral change in our customers as well. So it's important that we build on a momentum that happened last year.
And just quickly, I mean, despite the fact that we've all been distancing ourselves from one another over the past year, I mean, do you think that the pandemic has also hastened an adoption of more shared services? Paradoxically, I mean, it kind of goes against what you would think, that people sharing more, despite the fact that we shouldn't be near each other.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, it has. Strangely enough, you say that we see that over the last year that we've had a lot of people coming into our service and wanting to use our service, because there is the problems around public transport and involving public transport have been very apparent. But so that's why people have been drawn to wanting to have access to a car, but at the same time, they don't want to jump into buying a car. So there is a lot of the times where a customer say, I just need a car for this specific user case or this specific thing that I want to do in my life, but I don't necessarily want to buy a car that's going to be standing and costing me money, for 95% of its time. So yeah, we've seen an increase of customers coming into our service. We've also seen that moving outside of the center of the city to more of a suburban area. But at the same time, interestingly enough, also we've seen that a lot of our customers are actually walking more and using public transport more. So that just goes to show that when you move from into a car sharing service, you actually move into a much more multimodal lifestyle, which is more healthier, not only for our customers themselves, but also healthier for the city.
Thanks. Juha, I mean, we've also not just been sort of changing the way that we move from point A to point B. Of course, urban environments are changing as we begin to work and shop and live in different ways. What are your thoughts on this?
The question was good, and as you said, we very much discuss about the transportation and how do we really go there, what kind of accessibility do we have. And as you maybe know, we have municipal elections next month in Finland, and just now we have very active discussion in Helsinki, especially should we rely on private car mobility or more public transportation? How about walking? How about cycling environments? And then there are of course different opinions, and somebody saying that yes, those people who come in by car, they are buying more from the shops and so on. But I think we should speak more about how do we hang around there? How do we stay there in the urban environment? What do we do there? What kind of services want to have? What is a streetscape there? How we can maybe also work there sometimes? What are those restaurants, cafes, music clubs, whatever? And it's the most crucial question related to cities. It's how we exist there, not only discussing about the transportation. It's sometimes a little bit disturbing because we speak only about that, and I think that we coming back to the idea, the original idea of the city, which is that all the activities are close each other, so we can easily utilize though. We can stay there, we can go shopping, restaurant, whatever, by walking, and everything is close. That's the key point, and that's something we should discuss more about, the end user perspective, as said before.
Yeah, and Charlie, you mentioned when we were talking the other day that the post-pandemic city begins and ends with health and well-being, and you were discussing this in connection with the concept of the 15-minute city that I believe the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, had coined that term. Please explain about this.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely crucial that we focus on creating very healthy cities, because the risks are so great that people lock themselves in, that we get illness and bad health. and we can calculate those costs now. So we really need to see how, and this is what we're talking a lot about at Sweco, how can our architectural design contribute to bringing people out there? We must get people out there socializing again. So the role of design in that, to avoid anything from loneliness related problems, psychological problems, to just healthcare costs. And to give an idea, Sweco looked at the figures in Gothenburg, the size of Helsinki, of course, where cycling has increased in 1 year, about 15%, which means that you could talk of saving as many as 25 lives in 1 year, just from cycling like 4 kilometers. So based on that, if you would say that half the population, less than half the population of Gothenburg would cycle for half an hour every day, that would save 91 lives and 3.6 billion Swedish kroner. So this is why, what can we do? And at Sweco, we use the concept of sharing speed, which I think is interesting in today's context of mobility services as well, because it's like we're all vehicles and we're now negotiating at which speed should we move. We have scooters, we have the slow driving cars, and we even have turtles. I wanted to share this with you. I don't know if you know, Anna König went back to the 1920s, but in the 1830s, when the cities were new, the boulevards were new, we had the concept of the flaneur in the city, where people would walk so slowly that Walter Benjamin, the philosopher, he wrote about this, inspired by Baudelaire and others, that you would walk in the arcades of Paris with a turtle in a leash, because to really expose yourself in that city. So this is what we're heading towards. It's not designed at the speed of the car. It has to be very slow, autonomous mobility services. It's rather finding this now, fine-tuning.
Super interesting. So listen, the time is flying, and this is a super interesting conversation. We have sort of a little bit of a lightning round here. We've got about 9 minutes, and then Ville is going to come back with a little bit of maybe 5 minutes of viewer questions. So quickly, Milla, you've been talking about the importance of making sort of sound, data-driven decisions when it comes to building more resilient cities, breaking data silos, facilitating good data flows. Why is this so important?
Yeah, well, my background is in digital services, and I think that basically our lives are half real time in physical world and half in digital world already. And I think there's only a few people that rather do decisions based on the best guess when it's possible to use data and build understanding on top of the data and then make the decisions. And there's a whole lot of data, and gathering the data is not usually the issue anymore. However, if we cannot get the most out of it with the use of analytics, simulations, and so on, we cannot be smart enough. And we've talked about mobility. I have to give you an example. Let's say the air pollution level in some area has risen. At the same time, there's a football match or concert ending at the arena. It produces a peak in the traffic. Let's add a couple of street construction works and to this equation, which is very normal and quite simplified example. With good data flows, we could already kind of control how people are moving. Are they choosing bicycle or scooter or, whatever. We could also give this information to the autonomous cars or taxis or navigators to choose the best possible option at that time. So these kinds of making tomorrow better, I would like to see.
Okay, and I know, Steinar, you've been involved in a project called Street Moves. Could you give us a brief overview of that?
Yeah, sure. But just beforehand, I think building what Milla was saying, for us at Volvo Car Mobility, data is the fuel of mobility. That's what we really see. That is that to be able to distribute cars and services in the right way, in the most effective way. But alongside of that, I think it's also very important for us to be able to bring to life the vision of what we can do when we start sharing mobility and specifically cars. And that's when we got involved in a project from Vinnova, which is a mission-based project, which is the goal of that was to try to transform the streets of Sweden into a much more integrated areas for humans and environmental needs as well. And the main idea of it was to try and create in a very quick and prototype way a national it's kind of a modular system that can be easily rolled out to create an area for like a parklet that can create social interaction or seating or green infrastructure in an area that was effectively a car parking space. The project was called Street Moves, and within the first year, the parklets were already rolled out inside Stockholm. And from that, then that's been developed into both in Gothenburg and Helsingborg and more cities from that as well. The main interesting thing with that project, and the thing that inspired me and got the most, was that the way that it was done together with a very wide cross-sector group of people, everybody from us at Volvo Car Mobility, but the City of Stockholm, Swedish Transport Information Agency, Voi Micromobility, Swedish Public Health Authority, and other design agencies that helped with the design of the actual modular system. But all of that was going really into what the mayors were talking about earlier, which is about the collaboration not only between cities, but the collaboration between sectors to be able to try and solve this, but do it in a very human level. I'm not looking at, okay, how do we change the whole infrastructure of the city? Let's say, okay, let's do it on a prototype level at a street level to really be able to illustrate what you can do when you start sharing things like cars and how you can make a city and a street much more healthier and viable.
Thanks. Juha, quickly, just a couple of minutes. I mean, how would you say that work life has changed for us, and has it changed forever?
Yes, just considering the specialist work, I would say that it will be more porous. I mean, one day you're in office, one day at home, one day at customer space, sometimes at library, sometimes at a cafe. So you change the faces. And mostly, I would say, inside the urban region. So that will be the future. And of course, we have a certain amount of people which have possibility to real multi-locality, but those are quite rare. So we are changing places inside the city, I would say.
Mm. Oh, that's really interesting. And Charlie, we've got one final question to you. You'd mentioned in one of our conversations, I think it was like the building as a battery in the electrified, sustainable city. How does this work?
Well, I use that concept because I'm so afraid that the mobility domain and the real estate domain will develop separately. The smart city, the smart sustainable city, we need to look at this from an integrated perspective. And this is from my perspective, also from leading one of the test beds in the Sharing Cities Sweden program, which is really about circular economy. And if you take a building, it really needs to help in balancing the load balancing of the electrical power grid. We need to use the solar energy. We need to store. We need to charge. So let's use the buildings to charge the electrified society. And mobility services and real estate services need to be integrated for a really good sharing economy development.
Mm. Well, listen, we're going to put a pin in this conversation right now and go back to Ville Blåfield. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you for a great, interesting discussion. We have a couple of critical comments here, or questions. I think this first one is for Steinar, I think. Are you saying consumers would not want to drive for sustainable solutions based on their own values, not too much faith in us individuals?
Yes, consumers do, but I think that there is a high demand on making sure that those services work well, and I think that generally within sustainability, that if the requirement is, if the sacrifice is too large, then unfortunately customers will go with a more convenient method, and that's why we are really, really focused on creating a great customer experience at Volvo Car Mobility, because we understand the importance of that. So our goal and what we are trying to achieve is to create a better service than what it would be to own your own car, from a financial perspective, but also from a time perspective and what you want to do with it. That's what we need to focus on. I think by tackling sustainability, we need to focus on the customer experience and make it easy and accessible for people to do. I mean, just look at what's happened with the transformation of digital media. That it makes much more sense for me to, instead of owning a load of DVD or video cassettes, I can just be a member of Netflix, for example. The same thing can happen with the physical assets around us as well. It's just up to us to be able to create a great customer experience that make that transition easy for people.
And this was an interesting comment, I think. Let's see who wants to answer to this one. Should we also see who do not benefit from our design? Everyone is not a winner in urban development. How could we see the losers and move to a more inclusive direction in urban development and design as well? Any thoughts?
So who'd like to take that? Juha?
Yes, considering especially Finnish case, I would say that the development of suburbs are the key question. And we discussed much about sense of community there, but my message is that we need there public investments, private investments, better transportation systems, and suburbs are a key answer to that, and we should have more focus on there.
Yeah, Charlie.
Yeah, I think we need to give mandate and voice to underrepresented groups of society, and that there are now new forms of doing that. The climate assemblies, the citizen assemblies that are being tried in various countries, where you really seek to find those underrepresented groups in society and allow them to have a decision-making possibility. That's where it needs to start. And I know in Finland, you're working with citizen budget, for example, by taking a part of the municipal budget and letting citizens take charge of that. I think these initiatives are important to take people seriously.
Thank you very much. I think that is all our time. I thank all our panelists and thank you, Ville. Looking forward to crushing you in Eurovision and in ice hockey. But I guess working together in attracting global talent, then maybe that's the learning of this hour. And thank you to the mayors, of course. Thank you to all of you watching. We will send a summary of this discussion again together with the recording to you all, so you can come back to the discussion and the highlights of it later on if you want, or share it in your own networks. We would highly appreciate if you would take a minute also to answer our feedback survey. Next Miltton Futures is already, the sixth one is already on May 31st. And then we will be tackling the European Green Deal. But for now, thanks for watching.